Okay, hello again. Today we're going to be working on cadences. So this is the natural next step after expanding our phrase, right? In the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about phrase expansion, and specifically right before this, we talked about 6/4 chords and how 6/4 chords can kind of operate as a dominant in some cases or a prolongation of certain harmonies. So, what happens when we get to the end of our phrase? When we know from experiencing music in general that there's usually kind of a rhythmic component to a cadence. We often have a longer note value at the end, like we have right here in the example that I've got up in front of us. Um, Preceding this, a lot of times we have sort of a preparation for the ending. So we'll have kind of a quicker passage of harmonies. We call that harmonic rhythm, and then up until the dominant, and then we have kind of a longer tonic to resolve that. And then that makes us feel like, oh, this is a cadence. So there are a couple of different things that work to kind of tell our ear that we're coming to the end of a phrase. The rhythm of the actual progression, the rhythm of the melody and the melody line itself, because the melody is going to highlight some of these harmonies, and then of course the harmony. Okay, so today what we're going to focus on mostly is the harmony. And previously in our AP Music Theory curriculum, we've already identified authentic cadences, but we're going to start with authentic cadences just for review and then add a couple more on today. So let me get my notation tool here. Just to get started with authentic cadences, we know that there are two types of authentic cadences. One is perfect, one is imperfect. Now, a perfect authentic cadence has to satisfy two different criteria. We are going from a 5, it can be a 5/7, it can be a regular triad 2, in root position, has to be root position, to a tonic chord in root position. Both have to be root position. Okay, that's number one. Number two is that our melody line has to step down or up using either a T-do or a re-do construction. So in this case, we've got G major, obviously. Okay, and we're going 5/1, right? We see that we're in root position in both of these chords. This happens to be a 5/7 chord. And then up above, we basically have a 2/1 melodic line. So this is our re do melodic line. Therefore, perfect authentic cadence. Okay. The fact that we have an anticipation here, put this in intentionally. This happens an awful lot, especially in Baroque music, but just common practice period in general. That does not impact the cadence. Okay, the fact that there's an anticipation or a retardation, that kind of obscures the rhythmical complexity, doesn't necessarily have any impact on the cadence itself. If we have root position 5 to root position 1, and we're going 2/1 or 7/1 in the upper voice, then we've got a perfect authentic cadence. Okay. Okay. So moving along. Here we go. Oops, got to clear that out. There. All right, so we have another authentic cadence, which is imperfect authentic cadence. Basically, the imperfect authentic cadence is anything that does not satisfy those first two requirements we talked about with the perfect authentic cadence. So let's say we've got a 5/1, but we have an inversion. Maybe we've got a 5/6 that's going to a 1 chord. That's possible, and especially the leading tone in the bass, that's very likely. So that would be considered an imperfect authentic cadence. Maybe for some reason we've gone to an inverted tonic. That's an imperfect authentic cadence. If you have a root position 5/1, but maybe you had the 7th in the upper voice, and so we have a fa mi kind of melodic line, that's imperfect authentic. So it's really anything that does not completely satisfy those two criteria we've set aside for those perfect authentic cadences. So let's analyze this. We're in G major again. Okay. And we know these are, well, we know this one is a 5/1. We've got 5 chord lined up here, which looks a little different than what you're going to see on the AP exam. This is a little bit more like a keyboard example, but we can imagine that the A is up above, or even that the F is up here. You know, that would be fine too. We know this is a 5 chord. And then in the upper voice, we've got a 2, right? We know we're going to a root position 1 chord. And in the upper voice, we're going to a 1. This is considered a PAC, right? This is very similar to what we saw on the last screen. So looking at the, oopsie, sorry, stray mark. Looking at the next screen, or sorry, the next example, we still have this 5 chord, but it's inverted, right? We, for some reason, have this 5, 6, 4. Could be, you know, a passing chord like we learned last week, or it could be, you know, prolongation, maybe an arpeggiated chord. Maybe we're ending an arpeggiation. We don't know what came before this, right? And then we're going to a 1 chord here. The 1 chord is also not in first inversion, right? We are, or sorry, not in first inversion, in root position. We've got a G and a B up above, and then our D below. So this is actually a 6/4 also. Highly irregular, but you know, pretend it can happen. Any of these inversions are going to be an IAC. Okay. And just for reference, making sure we remember we could go 5, 6 to 1. That's a very common one that's an IAC. And another really common one is to have a 4 to a 3 in the upper voice. You could also leap in the upper voice. Sometimes we have like a 5 to a 1 in the upper voice. That could happen. Occasionally the 5 stays in the upper voice because we have a common tone between the dominant and the tonic, right? So there are variations on this, but basically the IAC is anything that is not a PAC, right? Going 5 to 1. All right, so now adding some of these new ones. Half cadence. Now we've talked about half cadence, but I don't know that we've really defined half cadence. Half cadence has a lot of different permutations also. Most commonly, we have some kind of predominant chord, right? So let's say a 4, maybe a 2, 6, some kind of predominant, right? So predominant. And we follow that with typically a 5 chord, but anything that has the leading tone. So it's a 5 chord most commonly, but you could also maybe do a leading tone chord, right? Something that has the leading tone in it. So in that, that situation, we have a lot more variation, right? And we're not worried here about inversion. So notice that I put the 2 in the 6 inversion because that's what's most common for predominant. And of course, our 7 chord, which is our leading tone chord, can function as a dominant, but we like to have it in the first inversion so that we are not putting the tritone that's so strident in that chord in our outer voices. So, so it always appears, at least 99% of the time, appears in that first inversion. So that's why this opening here is sort of a big question mark. It's any chord that we want. So if we're in F major, think about F major. What is our 4 chord? Let's just say we want to do a root position 4. So we've got F, G, A, B. So we can do a B flat. And of course, it's going to be B, D, and F, right? So let's see. Let's maybe try to move our, well, we can't double the B flat here because we've got an octave in this voice here. So let's maybe say we're going to try to move opposite directions. Okay. And maybe the F is here. So again, we've got a little bit of kind of contrary motion. Oh, nope, can't do that. We're going to have parallel fifths, right? So just to highlight that. Doop, 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 doop. Right? Parallel fifths. So let's choose a different path there. Maybe we can put the F in the upper voice, which is going to be, oops, Oops, I'm still in red. It's going to be kind of a wide. There we go. Wide spacing, but that's okay. We're still within our octaves, and maybe like that. Okay, that is potentially possible. But that would be an example of a 4 chord. All right, going to a 5. Remember, just like we saw, going from root position to root position chord, especially stepwise like this 4 to 5, which is a relatively common progression, we have to really, really, really be careful about the parallel fifths and parallel octaves, which we also avoided here too. Okay, so again, kind of any chord, most likely a predominant chord leading to a 5 chord. Now, there is a special kind of half cadence that's called the Phrygian half cadence. Let's see if I can type that in here. Phrygian half. And this is when we're in minor. And well, actually, no, we don't have to be in minor, but it does happen most commonly in minor, where we have a 4/6 going to a 5. Okay. And in that scenario, got something going on. Hold on one second here. Pull the wrong page. There we go. In that scenario, we actually have an instance where we have like a motion that feels a little bit like a Phrygian mode. Okay, so let's do a little bit of just chord analysis when it comes to the construction of the chord here. So we've got a 6 to 5, or sorry, I should say a D flat going to a C, right? So we've got a half step motion in the bass. And then up above, we have various ways that we can voice this. A lot of times it's in the upper voice, sometimes it's in the alto, and that's okay. But then we have this half step motion in one of the upper voices. So we've got the F going to the E natural. Okay. And in a way, these half steps feel a little bit like the Ra to Do half step that we have in our Phrygian mode. And that's why we end up with this kind of extra special label for the Phrygian half cadence. The Phrygian half cadence does not frequently happen with the leading tone chord. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind too. And it's very specific. So again, usually in minor mode, almost always it's a 4 to a 5 in minor, and it's the 4/6 so that we get that motion in the bass. That's that half step. Okay, so that's a little bit of a special cadence, and I think kind of a favorite of certain composers that we'll see as we're analyzing here. All right, the last cadence we're going to talk about today is the plagal cadence. So plagal cadence is where it's often called the amen cadence, okay? And that's where we have a 4 to 1 at the end. Most commonly, it's also preceded by another 1 chord. So it's often, can't draw, there we go. It's often a 1/4/1. And this is not 100% necessary. It's usually, identifiable at least by the last 2 chords. But remember what we talked about last time, where we had like a neighboring motion for a pedal 6/4. We're going to feel a little bit like that in this particular cadential setup, right? And it again has this very distinctive upper voice motion. We've got 2 different voicings of this this example here. So let's just take a look and see what we've got. So a 4 to a 1 in F major, both root position chords, and these can be in inversion. We're not picky about inversions for plagal cadences. Okay, so 4 to 1, and then in the upper voice here, basically we've got a 4, right, going to a 3rd scale degree. So it's that amen. That's where we get that cadence name from. We don't have it in the second example. We have just a different voicing, but basically the same chords, right? So a 4-to-1 root position, but our amen is not in the upper voice. In this case, it's hidden a little bit. Okay, so our 4-3 is in the middle. All right, either one is fine. We're much less picky about the plagal cadence and the half cadence in terms of inversion and chord type, in terms of the voicing, than we are with the perfect authentic cadence, right? The perfect authentic is highly specialized. The plagal half cadence is pretty highly specialized, but for not plagal half cadence, the Phrygian half cadence is highly specialized. The plagal cadence, the regular half cadence, and the IAC are they have variables and kind of question marks. Speaking of question marks, in terms of some of these cadences, sometimes I like to think of them like the punctuation of a phrase. So if that helps, you can kind of pull that out of your memory banks here. So an authentic cadence, a PAC is sort of like an exclamation point, very direct, very purposeful, right? The IAC, you're just ending a statement, right? It's maybe not as exciting as the PAC, but it's just a period, coming to an end. The half cadence, both half cadences are called cadences in name, but there's sort of a debate in the music theory world about whether they're really cadences, because as a half cadence, you end on a dominant, and the dominant really isn't the end. The dominant requires resolution. And so it's a cadence in that we have a pause, or that we have all those other elements coming to the end, like the rhythm and the melody, but it begs more, right? And so because of that, I sort of think of it like a question mark. The plagal cadence, okay? The plagal cadence is one of these cadences that doesn't necessarily fall into any particular category. It's a little bit more of a period, it's not an exclamation point. It's a little bit more subdued. There's one that we have not yet talked about, and that one I'm actually going to do a little bit of a different share here so that I could draw it out for you, because I didn't find a great example of it when I was looking earlier. Let me stop sharing for a minute and make sure we've got that up. Good. Okay. There we are. And that's the deceptive cadence. Okay. Now, deceptive cadences, we're going to be coming up to a little bit later. But since we're talking cadences today, this is, the time to do it. Let's see here. Let's just say we've got, make sure I can draw. Okay. Let's just say we've got our staff here. And our deceptive cadence is where we want to go to a period. We want to go to an exclamation point. We're setting up ourselves to finish this phrase in sort of an authentic cadence type way. But instead of the authentic cadence, we twist things around and we end on a 6 instead of a tonic. Okay, so let's stick with F major like we've been doing. Okay, just our last couple of examples were in F major anyway. All right, and we're plugging along on our progression here, and we get to our dominant chord. And again, the dominant can kind of be in a variety of different voicing here, but I'm going to go ahead and give us this. All right. And we need to resolve it. Okay. Right. So we know that this leading tone has to come up. However, we want to resolve it to a 6 instead of to a tonic. Okay. So the 6th chord in F is D, F, and A, right? So let's go ahead and make this a root position. And we have to be careful. We can't move the upper voice to D because, again, this is one of those potential, stepwise progressions, just like we saw 4 to 5. Now we're going 5 to 6. We have to be careful about that. We don't want parallel octaves or parallel fifths. So we're going to end up having to maybe move a C somewhere else. So let's maybe move it down to A. Okay. And it's really nice if we can potentially double the root here, because it reinforces the actual deception, right? We're going to D instead of going to a regular F major chord. So it's nice if we can do that, but we can't always do that with our voicing. So in this situation, if we went to D in the middle voice, we'd have to come up here. Okay. And that's technically okay, because this fifth octave that we have in the bottom voice, bottom voices, is hidden in the inside of the chord. And so that's okay to do. You could also elect to come down here, okay, to the F, because that's exactly an octave between those inner voices. So you're not making any mistakes there. It would just depend on, where you're coming from with your initial voicing. This can also happen with a 5/7 chord, which also complicates things. It's a little less common, I think. But in that situation, let me get a different color. The B flat would be your 7th. You might put the B flat here and then have this little stepwise down to A. Okay, so that's another voicing application. And this, let me write it in here, is the deceptive cadence. Okay. All right, so, and again, just to kind of finish off our analogy, the deceptive cadence, you can end a piece, right? So it feels maybe a little bit like a question mark, but it's not a question that needs an answer. So, with our punctuation analogy, this might be another period, but just much weaker. Might be a comma, or a semicolon, if it continues on. You can think of it that way as well. Some people like to think of the half cadence as a comma and the deceptive cadence as a question mark. However that speaks to you is fine. Of course, it's not a direct analogy or anything like that, but it, it does take on that feeling sometimes in real music. Okay, hopefully this was helpful today. Just keep remembering we've got a couple of different cadence types that come in all different shapes and sizes. The authentic kind of factors into perfect and imperfect. Half cadence, it always ends on 5 or a dominant of some kind. So the 7 also creeps into that. We have the plagal cadence, which is a 4, 1 to 4, or sorry, 1 to 4 to 1, I should say. It's always that 4 that comes in for plagal. We have the deceptive cadence, and that is the kind of twist ending. Okay, we think we're going to a 1, we get set up to go to a tonic, and then we kind of shift gears and end up with a 6.